Welcome to the Spherity podcast season, Product Passport Pioneers. My name is Susanne Guth-Orlowski, and I'm Chief Innovation and Solutions Officer at Spherity. Today, I have the pleasure to speak to Anh Dao. She's professor at the University of Toronto, and she also owns a consulting firm for supply chain management and data strategy. Welcome, Anne. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
As a short sneak preview for our listeners, today's episode will shed some light into things that happen in the CIRPASS project, which also was already introduced in this series in the episode with Mario Malzacher. But today we want to focus a little bit on the impact of the DPP for small and medium-sized enterprises, so for SMEs. And we will talk about the challenges, but also the benefits that the Digital Product Passport will bring into their lives and daily business. For a start, and please introduce yourself to the audience. What's your professional and personal background?
My background is in supply chain management and operations management. So I work as a consultant. And in the last 10 years or so, I got more into data management. As I realized through my work experience is that a lot of inefficiencies in supply chain are due to the lack of data or reliable data. And also the field of data analytics, data management, machine learning, and now AI have advanced so much, both in terms of technologies and in terms of business applications, that make it possible to do things that we couldn't do before. So that's how I got into the space of data. And as for being part of the Digital Product Passport work and over the sustainability related area, it started with my graduate research, where I started to think not only about products, what happened to product, return products, what happened to the end of life products. And I'm also heavily involved in the paper manufacturing, in which recyclable papers is actually a very big concern, because that basically the supplies and inputs of business. So I came to view supply chain as a loop and not a linear direction, and that sharing information, finding out what happened to materials, to products, is essential. So that's why Digital Product Passport and the concept of circular economy, digitalizations of circular economy become kind of natural path for me. So that's how I got to working and being involved with Digital Product Passport's work.
Thank you. In your current projects or in your current role as in the CIRPASS project, what do you do? What's your role? What are you working on there?
So in CIRPASS, I'm involved in a couple of tasks. One is to work on data requirements of Digital Product Passport. So we look through regulations, we look through what are coming up, we look through all the available initiatives that could be considered Digital Product Passport, and find out what data is being included, and then sort out what is needed, what is optional, what is absolutely must-have mandates. We also look at other related issues involved around data, which is how hard or how easy it is to get the data. Is there any concern of the governance, security, privacy, all that issues around data. I'm also involved with the part where we investigate the benefits and business use case of DPP, which is very interesting because we're all very excited about it. But when it comes out to that, was the need to specify what they are, what actually happens, who benefits from that. So that's another one. And also another part is the DPP implementation role mapping. So as CIRPASS, at the end of the day, we're hoping we'll be able to lay out roadmaps for a couple of sectors, as well as an overall roadmap for DPP implementation. What should happen, or what we think should happen in the next few years.
So when you look at the data stuff, we've just seen the guidance from the German project, the battery pass, which is probably very focused on battery use case. And I assume you're kind of taking a look at the broader use case for different products, right?
Yes. With the three sectors that CIRPASS are focusing on are batteries, textile, and electronics. So yes, battery is definitely one of the sectors we're looking at and actively looking at and talking about it, because so far that is the one sector that has the clearest and most detailed guidelines on what a digital product passport's supposed to look like.
Yeah, thank you for this overview. So let's define the DPP in your view. Kind of what's the DPP for you personal, or from your personal view, and maybe also what is it not a DPP? Because sometimes I already have here podcasts and read articles where people put more in the DPP than it actually is. I mean, the fantasy is really big sometimes. So sometimes we have to explain what the DPP is and what is also not the DPP. So maybe you can give us your personal view on that.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head, and I think that is less than the $1 million question of what's DPP, right? So like you mentioned, there's a huge wide range of definitions of DPP, with the expectation, what it could do. And on the one extreme, you would have the debate that it probably doesn't add much value, which is sort of another thing that just aggregate existing data. And on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have people who think this is one system that contains everything and solves all, that could potentially solve all information problems that you have, right? So I would say that's probably it's neither of those. It's for me, at least we got to the discussion here, we would think that DPP is an information system for the circular economy, basically to enable that. So hopefully it should contain information that enable the stakeholders to make more informed business as well as purchasing decisions. So we're sharing data to the public as well as B2B, and in a sense extending, hopefully it could achieve that whole including extending product life cycle, boosting material and energy efficiency. Hopefully it could foster some new business models, and ideally it could be used as a supporting tool for authorities to check for compliance and ensure compliance are met, because that is another major issue that what we have regulations, and all the compliance is really a concern. So these are the things that I think that the DPP should be.
Yes, and I think when we talk about the DPP, people really should look at the requirements that come from the European Commission that are in the regulation, and not do too much speculations, because obviously building the DPP first, the first step will be an investment for the entire industry. So we want to also to keep it as low as possible. So really focus on the requirements that we get from the European Commission, and not speculate too much what should all be in there, but stick to the rules. Which probably brings me direct to the next question. Because obviously the DPP will be an investment for the industry. What does the DPP especially mean for small and medium-sized enterprises, and how do they feel about it?
Right. So good question. Now, before I talk about SME, let's just briefly say why we care, because we usually heard a question that, we just come out with policies, and because it's a positive thing overall, and therefore business would just have to get on board with that. So the reason why we cared about SMEs is, in fact, SME, which has less than 250 people, according to the definition in the European Union, is actually the backbone of Europe economies. I think the sector employ around 100 million people. More than 90% of the business are actually SME. There's only the number of businesses are not SMEs very, very small, and it's an essential part of thriving local communities. So SMEs matter, and not to mention that they could have a lot of positive contribution to any kind of transition because it's small and nimble, and they could adapt new policies and new practice quickly. So that's why we cared about it. So how do they feel the WPP? I think the first and foremost is the lack of understanding what it is. Why is it come about? Why are we concerned about it right now, right? So, and then we have very specific question is when it comes in effect, what are the requirements? How much does it cost to implement it? Does it cost more to get all of this information? How do they ensure that validate the data? How do they make sure that if they need information from their suppliers, how do they get that? So I think overall, it's just the lack of understanding, the feelings that they don't have. Where do they get their voice heard? How do they impact policies being made, right? So those are the practical concern, and of course, we'll sum it up.
So I think what's really important that we need to do, also probably CIRPASS is already doing in other projects, is informing, right? Informing about the concrete needs, the concrete time plans, and the concrete impact and concrete costs probably that this brings to the SMEs, right?
Definitely. So that is actually a part of our work. It's not an official mandate of CIRPASS to look at the SME, but if you look at an ESPR, SMEs plays a very important role, and in fact, in the ESPR assessment a couple of years ago, SME was a part of that assessment to look at that and find out how they feel about it, if they perceive any benefits, what is the perceived risk and cost they have, and then even talk about how to mitigate this risk and get them on board, right? So yes, definitely informing the SMEs is an important part. Working with them to understand the challenge, what the barriers are, but as you can see, it's not always easy, right? Because to estimate the cost of something that hasn't been built, or to quantify the benefit of something that we still sit around and debate the shape of it, right? So we all believe that it is a good thing, but to be able to say this is a cost, this is a benefit, this is a positive net is not the easiest thing to do.
What is the DPP actually also relevant for SMEs outside of Europe? Are they looking into the DPP? What's your experience here?
So I have a little bit of experience working with business outside of European Union, and also if we look at supply chains, right, it's so global these days that if we looking at the business, only isolated business in Europe, then we're missing out the rest of the supply chain. So for business outside of Europe in general, and particularly for those in the upstream part of supply chain, my view or my experience over the years of seeing new policies, new thinking coming out, is that they have to comply, right? Because they have to follow, you have to because that's otherwise they would not stay competitive, or they would not be able to provide a supply to business outside of the country. For example, the new German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act that just came out, it actually being discussed actively of how local business would meet these requirements, how to affect them. So yes, it definitely affect them. So one can say that once the policies are made, if a business wanted to do conduct business with organizations in the EU, they would just have to follow that, but it would be extremely helpful if they have the help and the guidelines of what exactly that they have to do, the step by steps. And that's why there are organizations and even companies that communicate what they understand to their suppliers. But also, in my personal view, it's not enough to get them to comply and provide the information. It would be much better if you could convince why it matters to them and why it's important, because at the end of the day, you relied on their information to feed into the supply, the information of the entire chain, right? So if they realize the importance and the benefits and being supported properly, I think it's a positive thing. That the information would be much more reliable.
Yeah, so summarizing, first of all, I mean, obviously the SMEs also outside Europe need to comply to the DPP or the ESPR because they want to sell in Europe. And so projects, publicly funded projects such as CIRPASS will help them, but also other projects in Europe, which we've already mentioned and featured here. So there will be support, from the EU, from the different countries, for the SMEs to make the right decisions with regards to data, giving data away, data exchange, data protection, and so forth. But now we're coming to the very important part of this podcast, I think. Apart from just being compliant to the regulation, in your view, what other benefits does the DPP bring to the SMEs?
So now we talk about all the difficulties and we talk about barriers and how they feel about it. I think there are a number of benefits of having DPP, particularly to SMEs, and we'll still need to work on getting concrete evidence, but I think from the SPR survey and from my conversation at least with companies, there are some benefits that we can see is greater transparency along the supply chain and a better knowledge of their own supply chain. And when we look at the survey, there's a scary number of companies, particularly SMEs, have no idea what's going on in supply chain or lost track of their products when it's out of their hands. So these hopefully would be allowing for more information, for more transparency, and then from these more information, transparency, we could see benefits such as better planning. They could even leverage that for other new business models, right? So that we could talk about things like product as a service. We could talk about sharing economy, in which we'll share underutilized product and services. So these all require more transparency and more information. We could also look at another thing is that they with DPP, they will educate the purchasers, the consumers, to make more informed choice, because the idea is that if we have all the information and we understand the standards, we understand how these indicators are being measured and consistent across board, then that would help with consumers to make better choice. And that means for SME, now they have a way to show consumers to increase their trust that their products, that their claims that indeed have evidence to support and not just their own claims. So that is another thing that allow them to sell product better, to support their product. And another thing, at least for me personally, when I found that when a business is facing with change, whether it comes from regulations or market or anything like that, the sheer fact that I have to look within the business to find out how am I going to meet this new requirements, where am I getting this data, just that act alone a lot of time unveils a lot of inefficiencies within the companies, new insights, and it's very likely that they'll discover things that I hadn't seen before. So these are the benefits that I can I expect that we would see if DPP
Yeah, and also kind of the part that we always see as we're coming from the decentralized approach, the decentralized data storage, that you don't have to provide your data for this use case of DPP to central platforms, how it was the case in earlier solutions for European regulations such as REACH, where you have to put your data into a central platform, and then you kind of lose control over your data. Where does it go to? Is it still up to date? And so forth. You keep the data with yourself in the decentralized approach, and then also have the access. You can manage the access control over your data. You keep control. You can keep it up to date. You know, there's no redundant data flowing around in different platforms. I think this is also a big benefit. And with the transparency, what you mentioned, I always like to refer to or maybe clarify that transparency does not mean that everyone can look into your supply chain or everyone can see everything about your product. That's not what's meant with it. But just that, you know, certain information can be seen by actors in the supply chain that are actually allowed to see it. Yeah, I think that's sometimes there is some misunderstanding and maybe also some fear on the side of the SMEs that they have to give out too much data, which they don't want. That's not the case. You have all the data with you, and authorized roles and authorized users can see certain data for the use case that they need. But we don't, you know, putting the full transparency of a supply chain out there. Just, I just always like to clarify that when we talk about transparency, I think that's very important for SMEs as well, right?
That's a very good point. That when we say transparency, we mean that it will increase the amount of information and understanding across the supply chain, but that doesn't mean everyone could have the same access to all information. And I think maybe the battery regulation that just came out will specify a user group of stakeholders, a user group.
Mm-hmm.
That in what we say, who could have access to what piece of information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very good point to bring up. And in another part that I go back to what you're talking about, sharing information and having access, control of information and reporting, that is another thing that we could expect to see if DPP comes into place, that it could simplify reporting or, you know, requirements if we not get information being fed into the system, and it might be another very positive benefit for SME.
Yes, yes, I also agree. So thank you for listing those. I think there's a lot of potential in the topics that you've already mentioned. Does that kind of create some more high-level requirements for the digital product passport? Or do you, I mean, or the requirements, also the view of the SMEs, how does the product passport need to look like so that the SME is actually happy with it and is ready to implement it, because we need them, right? If the SMEs are not joining the ecosystem, then we probably don't add an extra value with the DPP. So how does the DPP needs to look like for SMEs to adopt it?
So for SMEs, and I think I suspect that it applied to all business, for DPP to be adopted and implemented well, we still need very basic requirements that we have need to be clearly well defined. The scope, the data requirements. We have consistent standards that are well established, that are accessible. And for SME in particular, ideally, we should have some low-cost options, for example, as a service, as opposed to building their own system. And a lot of communication and clarify all the unknowns so that it will be implemented well. So yeah, so to sum up, clear requirements, consistent, acceptable standards, and options, low cost options.
Yes.
And obviously, on top of that, within the EU, there's talk about providing particular support to SMEs, whether or not to increase their digital transformation capability, whether or not it could be in the form of financial support or any of that. But there's definite discussions on how to support SMEs.
Yes, yes. And there are also already some activities underway here. We have, we're working on a lot of projects that are being publicly funded, where we are also part of building technology that we put out as reference implementation, which is open source. We did that, for example, as part of the Gaia X Federation services, and there's more to come. So I believe that if we have open source, open standards-based technology, which is permissionless to join, then we will be very successful. Yeah, because that's also the basics of today's internet. If it wouldn't be so open source and open standards and permissionless, it wouldn't have been such a big success. So I think that we need to apply the same rules to the product passport, and then we can really have a powerful tool to digitize actually the supply chain and this global data exchange. And that's also what I guess we all are working on and trying to achieve. Coming from this position now, what hurdles do you see in reaching this goal at the moment in the work that you do, Em?
I think we already list a bunch of the hurdles that we think that we're facing, right? Including to clearly understand the DPP, to set the scopes, to understand what the data requirements, what the systems that we'll build, because we want to have interoperable system, not only across organization, but across supply chains, for example, across sectors. Then we have the issues of data security, privacy, IP rights. How do we protect that? Because again, back to the idea that being transparent and sharing data does not mean one would lose all their IP rights, right? So that those are the hurdles that I can see. But one other thing that, at least for me, coming from the experience of dealing with analytics project or managing analytic projects or AI project, is managing expectation and basically dealing with the hype, because we are at a moment now, DPP is getting momentum where it's basically getting hype up that it could be a lot of things and it could do a lot of things. And if we don't set the expectation and manage that and understand reality of what it can do and what it cannot do, we could easily create false hope, and people feel that the implementation is not delivering the benefits that they expected to deliver. So for me, that is another challenge that one need to do. So lots of communication, a lot of projects are working on similar ideas, work it communicates, understand, communicate with the SMEs, not just in terms of the technical details, but in a very plain, easy to understand this language as well, right? So these are all the challenge that I see that DPP is going to have to.
Yeah, I agree. And at the beginning, you also said that part of your task at CIRPASS is to look at the roadmap. So now we're coming to the roadmap. So where do you see the digital product passport in 5 years, 10 years, or what time horizons do you have on your roadmaps? Maybe give us some insights of your work there.
So for us, of course, it's very difficult to predict precisely, but I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see more DPP-like initiatives, but also convergence of what technologies, what path would work. So we'll see those that actually have the advantage to or deliver a result would rise to the top. We would see, I suspect that we'll see more pilots on larger scales
Mm-hmm.
in actually in different industries, so which give us more understanding of what approach, what architecture would work. And I'd also see, of course, the prioritizations of certain industries that maybe are already in the position that they could create DPP. They have acceptance across companies, or have a very large impact that they require policymakers to look at that, right? And I also see the thinking of interoperability. What does that mean, right? In terms of standards, in terms of architecture, in terms of sharing. So all of these, I think, is going to be happening in the next few years. So, and concretely, I think we might have some form of workable DPP for a few sectors in industry, or at least among a small groups of industries that are already in a position that they could do
we
that.
have to, right? We have to, because I mean, I think the exact date when the DPP is now mandatory can be now calculated, and we'll probably do some of that coverage in the next in one of the next podcasts. But we cannot, it cannot take 5 to 10 years. We have to have something in 2026, 2027, where companies are being obliged to provide a digital product passport, starting with batteries, right? So there is now some pressure to find standards to communicate intensively between the different projects, right? So that's kind of what we really need to force. And maybe one other thing, which just came out right yesterday, is the adoption of the eco-design for sustainable products regulations. So the text has changed a little bit. And we are all looking into that intensively at the moment. And there on the roadmap, the next step is the EU Parliament, right? To get it through the EU Parliament. So also from the legal point of view, there are a few upcoming steps. And I think whenever we see change here, also in the regulation, the standards projects have to adopt to it, and the other way around. Also, the work that you're doing obviously has fed into the adoption of the ESPR. So really, really valuable work that you're all doing there in the different projects, especially in CIRPASS. So thank you so much. We're actually coming to an end to this of this podcast. What's your most important message that you want to give to the audience? What's your wish maybe for DPP, or what message do you want to leave with the listener?
So it's my pleasure to be able to talk about DPP and share a little bit of my understanding and opinions on the topic. So my what I take out of the work at CIRPASS, as well as in the last 5-10 years getting involved into that, is I think the entire paradigm shift to a more sustainable economy, including the transitions to a circular economy and DPP as a digital tool, is gaining momentum, that it is here, and we can see how we can make it happen. And we at the point where we're paying attention to how we measure the impact with a concrete indicators. So I think that is a very positive thing. That is not just a talk, but it's actually we will implement concrete measurements. And I think we're on the right track. And DPP, I believe, is a very useful tool among a set of tools that we could use to enable these transition. And SMEs is playing an important role, so they should be included in this journey.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for all your insights. I guess we'll all be working on reaching this goal, making the DPP a success. And thank you for all your participation and all the work that you do to make our world a little bit greener.
It's my pleasure, and I absolutely, the part that I love most about working in CIRPASS actually is the chance to talk to other projects, working with some or people like in like you and the experts, because we all have our different approach and our thoughts of what could happen or what should happen. And I absolutely love, we have very good discussions across organizations, different groups, to just figure out what we can do, what the DPP should be shaped, what it should look like, what it could do, what's the technology. So I absolutely love these discussions.
Super. Thank you. And again, thanks for your participation. Looking forward to speaking to you again sometime.
Thank you very much.